This plant I've got here is called Cleavers, or goosegrass, or catchweed, or sticky willy. This is a particularly interesting plant because today we're going to use it to try to make a coffee substitute. Goosegrass is a plant in the bedstraw family, which a lot of the members of the family look like this. They have slender, fibrous stalks with leaves radiating in a little star shape out of the node there. This one in particular, Cleavers, has a stickiness to it. It's not sticky like glue, it's sticky like Velcro. In fact, let's just take a close look at why that is. We'll get some microscope footage here of this plant. It has little hooks or bristles or structures that catch onto a variety of different things, mostly soft things. So it's very good at sticking to clothing, as you can see here. And part of the reason for that is that that helps this plant climb up through hedgerows, which is what it tends to do. It's a very sprawling, trailing plant. It grows up through bramble bushes and hedges and whatnot. So the stickiness of this plant enables it to grip onto the things it's climbing up. But also the little seeds here, you can see this is covered with little seeds, and the seeds also have these little hooks and catchy bristles on them, and when they're ripe these detach from the plant. They will attach themselves to the fur of animals and be transported to a different place, and where they might fall off and grow in a place where this plant isn't already. This is one of many plants that people have used over the years to make substitutes for coffee, and in general the idea with coffee substitutes is you take something, you roast it, and because it's roasted it tastes a bit like coffee because coffee's got a roasted flavour. Probably the most common commercial coffee substitute is chicory, which is this plant. Lovely blue flowers. The roots are cultivated, and if you chop up the roots and roast them, it makes a drinkable substance that doesn't contain caffeine and somewhat resembles coffee. Dandelion roots are used in a very similar way. Dandelion's obviously quite closely related to chicory. Goosegrass or Cleavers is particularly interesting as a coffee substitute though, because for one thing we're using the seeds to make the coffee, which is quite analogous to the way coffee is made. It's made from the seeds of the coffee plant. But the other interesting thing is that this plant is related to coffee. This is in the same botanical family, Rubiaceae, as coffee. And as a result, it does share some biochemistry with coffee. And so in theory, the coffee that we make here from these seeds may contain some of the same stimulant properties as real coffee, caffeine primarily, or substances related to it. In spring, this plant is a vigorous climber that sprawls through hedges. In summer, we're now at the start of July, it dies back and these seeds ripen. And that's where we are now. So I'm going to go out in a minute, pick a load of these seeds, we'll prepare them, roast them, and we'll see how good of a coffee substitute they really are. So this is the plant in question, and these are the seeds. And it's not that hard to pick quite a lot of seeds. I mean, for the purposes of what we're doing for this experiment anyway, it probably would be quite hard to pick enough seeds to supply myself with coffee substitute year round, but that's not what we're aiming to do here. I'm just going to try and pick enough that I can have a taste of this. So that's the plan, is go along this hedgerow, pick a load of Cleavers seeds. It is certainly important to make sure that you're picking the right seeds. So for example here we've got some Cleavers seeds, and then here we've got what is probably cow parsley, but I can't really tell because it's dead. But you could, if you're not careful and you're not paying attention, you could end up picking the wrong kind of seeds, and some plants are poisonous. So it's time for me to show that graphic. Foraging is not without risks, and you have to manage those risks by being sufficiently careful and educating yourself on properly identifying the species you're picking. And whilst there is information in these videos that would help you do that, the identification notes I give you in these videos are not necessarily definitive or complete. So here is my harvest of Cleavers seeds. As I mentioned when I was picking them, it took a while to pick these. I suppose that's the result of about half an hour's picking. There probably are more efficient ways to pick this than I did. I think in the book A Country Harvest by Pamela Michael, which is the book wherein I first encountered the idea of using Cleavers seeds for coffee, I think she has some ideas on how to pick the seeds more productively by cutting the vines, allowing the seeds to finally ripen on the vines and then shaking them off. I think there was something like that in there. So I think if you were trying to commercialise this as a coffee substitute and you were growing this plant on purpose, the harvesting method could be more efficient than what I just did in the hedgerows. Anyway, so we've got these seeds, and I'm just going to give them a little rub in a bag like that to break off the bits of chaff, because there is a fair bit of other material here to be separated from the seeds. Chaff in the conventional sense. So there we go. I'm going to take that outside now and blow away the lighter material, which is all of these twigs and any little bits of dust and leaves and things that might be in there. I'm not unduly worried about blowing a few of these seeds out into the garden, except for the fact that obviously I'm wasting them if I do. If it was a breezy day, I could perhaps just toss this in the air and allow the breeze to separate the small bits. It's not. It's a still hot day in July. So I will have to use my breath. In fact, it's very difficult to do this leaning over the table. So anyway, you get the idea. So there we go. Mostly cleaned Cleavers seeds. And my pre-roasting yield here is going to be, let's have a look, 22.5 grams of Cleavers seeds. I get the feeling this is going to make 1 cup of coffee. I have no idea how long it's going to take to roast these seeds or toast them, but I'm going to do it in my Vision ceramic pan. They'll be toasted by radiant heat coming straight through the pan, but also we can put a lid on this and still keep an eye on what's going on. I am expecting this process could be a bit smoky, so I think I will probably have the extractor fan on. There might be background music for this next bit because the extractor fan is noisy. Okay, I think we're there. Now I've transferred them out onto this metal tray because this pan retains a lot of heat and I don't want to go roasting these past the point where they're done. They've changed colour, they're now a pale roast coffee brown. So I'm going to let those cool and then we'll grind them and make some fake coffee. They do smell, let's say, coffee adjacent, and certainly some of the aromas that came off when I was roasting these were quite coffee-ish. We're down to 14.6 grams, so we've lost about 8 grams of probably mostly moisture. This little coffee and spice mill here, it is actually coffee grinder, it says on the pack. This has been used for a variety of other things. So just to remove any residual taint of spices or whatever I've ground in there last time, I'm just going to grind up some barley, just really to purge the machine. Of course I won't waste that. I'm going to bake some bread today. I will just add that to the bread dough. And hopefully that will have just removed or shaken loose any bits of spices or whatever I ground in there last time. And we'll go for a kind of, well, medium grind, I suppose. Just let that settle for a moment. And yeah, what we've got there does look like, well, kind of looks like ground coffee. It smells quite a lot like ground coffee. This is promising. Let's do another weigh in. In theory, we shouldn't have lost anything here, but in practice, there will be some that's irretrievably attached to the machine. 14.4 grams of plausibly coffee-looking stuff. I shall, for the purposes of this experiment, be using a cafetiere to make the coffee. I have no idea what's the appropriate amount of this ground mixture to put in there, so I'm going to go for a tablespoonful. So that's 7.3 grams of this fake coffee. So kettle is just off the boil. I'll try and put that so that you can see what's going on inside of there. And away we go. Well, there's a plausibly coffee-coloured dark brown liquid going on in there. I'm going to leave that to brew for about a minute, and then we'll press it, pour it, and taste it. Okay, one of your primitive human minutes has elapsed. Let us press this and see what we get. So, very gently. Okay, I'm not in the habit of drinking coffee from a glass, but let's pour a little bit out in glass and see what it looks like. Well, very pale in colour, so perhaps I did need more than that in there. And a sniff. It smells quite grassy. Now, one thing to say is I have no means of empirically testing the caffeine content, if there is indeed any caffeine or related chemical in here. So I'm going to have to just give you my subjective impression of whether this picked me up. I appreciate that's not a particularly scientific or precise measurement, but anyway, I think we've done enough talking. Let's give it a taste. I suppose you could probably say that tastes like coffee. I think I'm going to put the rest of that in there. I mean, it kind of looks like coffee a bit, doesn't it? Not dark enough, which does tend to make me suspect I didn't put enough in. We've got about 1 tablespoon left here. Perhaps I'll do another brew in a minute with half the amount of water. There is a coffee-ish flavour there. There is quite a predominant grassy flavour, like the aroma of hay. So that's drinking it black. We'll try it now with a bit of milk. Just a tiny splash of milk. That's come back looking a little bit on the grey side. Anyway, it does remind me a lot of dandelion coffee. There's this sort of earthy, grassy, leafiness to it. Okay, well, while that's cooling down enough to drink, I'm going to put the kettle back on and we'll have another brew with this lot. Right, so with this remaining amount, which let's just see what we got here, is 7.3 grams, so about the same as we had before. I'm only going to top this up to about there, so about half the amount of water we added last time. That'll do. I'll give that a minute to brew. A minute has elapsed. Let's see if this is any different. It looks a bit darker. I mean, still paler than I would normally think of coffee being. More flavour, but not more coffee flavour. This just accentuates that grassy, possibly coumarins here. Now, certainly other plants in the bedstraw family do contain coumarin, which is a thing that you probably shouldn't be consuming in large quantities. Yeah, I think if somebody gave me that, said, hey, here's a cup of coffee, I don't think I'd believe them. It tastes like roasted tea. Anyway, for the purposes of science, I'll drink the rest of this cup, and then I'll tell you whether I feel like I've had a cup of coffee. Back here in the studio then. So, another little taste with the smells of the kitchen now gone from my nostrils. Yeah, I think the best you can say about this is it is coffee adjacent. So I've tried a variety of different substitute coffees over the years, including some that I've bought and some that I've made myself. The one I think that was most convincingly coffee-like in flavour was dandelion coffee. I've made coffee from roasted dandelion roots, and the flavour of that came closest of all of the fake coffees to tasting coffee-like. I've also made acorn coffee, and that was pretty vile. This is somewhere in the middle. It doesn't have enough coffee aroma to convince me that I'm drinking coffee, and it has these other, like I say, grassy, probably coumarin aromas in there. I think, and this is so subjective that it's almost worthless, I do feel like I've had a cup of coffee. I do feel like something is now stimulating my system, which I would get from a strong cup of espresso or something like that, or a can of Red Bull. So I do feel like I've got that kind of caffeine-like buzz in my system. I don't have the means to chemically test this for stimulant properties, so we just have to guess and go by feel. And it does feel like that, but I could just be imagining it. So that was my attempt to make Cleavers coffee. I think maybe this is one of these things, so I've done it so you don't have to. Wouldn't say I would bother with that again, unless for some reason real coffee becomes impossible to obtain. And maybe I would go for a combination of dandelion coffee and Cleavers coffee to get that flavour plus stimulant effect, if indeed it's real. Brief interruption from Future Shrimp here. There very definitely is a stimulant effect. I went downstairs to clear up the kitchen. I've got this kind of uneasy caffeine buzz now that reminds me very much of that time I consumed more than one can of Red Bull. So I think this might be the right time to say, don't try this at home, kids. The trouble with anything like this is that I've now ingested an unknown dose of various things, and I'm a relatively healthy person, so I'm sure it won't do me any harm. But if you had, for example, a heart problem, it might not be all that good to try this. So I suppose that might just reinforce the whole thing about I've done this so you don't have to. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed joining me on this journey. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.